Hello, everyone, and it's good to have you all back. This is the second edition of Kitchen Table Magic for the Magic the Gathering Club. Really excited about this. We have designed 8 new decks for the club, and 7 of them are multicolored. We have one here that's a mono red dragon deck, just for fun. But the majority of these decks are here to teach new players the idea of combining colors, concepts like tokens, +1/+1 counters, non-basic lands, and even the idea of legendaries. 6 of these 8 decks have legendary creatures in them. They're not commander decks, they're not brawl decks, they're just standard 40 card decks, but they will have legendaries, so that may be a good talking point. Anyway, we have a token box here. So when you teach people what tokens are, you can look in this box. Sadly, we couldn't find tokens for all of these decks, but about 50% to 60% of the tokens were found. Okay, so let me run through what these decks are doing. So we're going to start with the decks that are lower on the power scale, and then we're going to work our way up. So this is White-Green Faithful Brawler. This is a +1/+1 counter deck that hopes to just play these really efficient dogs that put counters on them, and then by putting more counters on dogs, you're able to put more counters on your other creatures. There's 2 or 3 cards that proliferate, but you're only dealing with +1/+1 counters, so no like Planeswalker or Saga shenanigans. So this one wins on about turn 6 to 8. It's a slow deck, and it doesn't have a lot of ways to close out the game, but it's really fun for new players to start building up big creatures. The next one I have on the agenda is Dragon Breath. This is a mono red deck that hopes to win on turn 6. This is a deck that has hasty dragons, and it's teaching players about dragon tokens. There's Lathliss in here, which makes a dragon token every time you play a dragon. And so there are some cheap dragons, some middle dragons, and some big dragons. So overall, it's a pretty scary deck, but can burn out pretty quickly. Next up, we have Woe Nest. So this is based around an uncommon from Strixhaven called Woe Eater. And it's a 7/6, but in order to keep it around, you have to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of your upkeep. There are 4 of them in this deck. The idea is you want to play really small creatures at the beginning, and then you drop down your Woe Eater, and then your Woe Eater will just gobble up those small creatures you've made. It's named after the Woe Eater and Squirrel Nest, which is an enchantment that you can put on a land to make a 1/1 squirrel. So the idea is that you constantly tap that land to make a squirrel so that your Woe Eater is hungry and fed. It's a turn 6 deck. It's scary, but honestly, you can overcome it pretty quickly with any kind of interaction. However, it is so scary looking down the barrel of a 7/6 when you have 10 life, so I think a lot of new players will really enjoy playing with it just because of that stat line, and they'll really find it interesting playing around with this idea of like downsides. Next up, we have Red-Green Dragon Orb. So this is a ramp deck. This has a whole bunch of creatures that can tap to add mana. You'll have to teach new players this concept of playing stuff that is kind of bad to get better stuff out later in the game. This is a turn 6 to 5 deck, because if you get a big dragon in your hand and you get 2 ramp pieces, you're hitting people in the face for maybe 6 or 8 damage on turn 3 or 4, which can be just insane, and some people just can't overcome it. But it has the same issue that the other dragon deck had. If you don't have any dragons, or if you don't have any ramp, the deck won't do its thing, and so then it's more of a turn 6 to 8 deck. Next up, we have this blue-green Dr. Chatter deck. This has the most legendaries in the deck. This deck is all about putting cards into your graveyard in order to cast those spells that you're putting into your graveyard, so you have more and more advantage. This is teaching new players about the beauty of the graveyard, how it's a second hand of sorts. You're also going to be playing with a lot of tokens in this deck. A lot of these cards can make a 4/4 token or a 6/6 token when you cast it from your graveyard. This one just creates a lot of value early on and just gets bigger and bigger as the game goes on. Really grindy, but really fun for probably more advanced players. Speaking of grindy advanced players, this is the blue-black snacking Lich deck. This thing is nutty. This thing, it wins on turn 7 or 10, like in that range. And so why is it up here? It's up here because this deck recovers so easily. The whole thing is based around drawing lots of cards and gaining lots of life by drawing lots of cards and discarding lots of cards. So you're always like at 10 life. You always have these flying attackers and blockers, and a lot of these creatures in the deck can have Death Touch and Lifelink. So it's just a really grindy deck where you can always play something and your opponent's groan constantly. This thing is insane and can beat any of the decks here, but it will take a long time. So even though it takes a lot longer to win, this deck is the truth. Next up, we have Inspiring Writers. This is a classic red-white aggro deck. This thing, if you've played with the Goblin deck, will be very reminiscent of the Goblin deck. What's really funny is that there are some creatures in here that will destroy goblins, so that might be fun to play around with. But the power of this deck comes from how quickly it spirals. You'll be playing 2/2s on turn 2, and then they'll suddenly become 4/4s on the next turn. This deck does not mess around. This one wins on turn 3 or 4 if you have a good draw, and on a bad draw, it's winning on 5 or 6. This is the scariest deck that we built. This one is, oh my god. So this one can win on turn 3 and turn 4, maybe turn 5. We have not gotten to a game where it wins on turn 6 because they're always dead. This one has had a 0 lose percentage. This is blue-red Cathartic Blast. So this one, the whole point of it is to play creatures that let you cast big, splashy blue and red spells for cheaper. And you're often hitting people in the face for 8 damage on turn 4 or 5. And on turn 3, you can conceivably win by just having a cathartic Sarkhan's Catharsis and just hitting people in the face for 5 and then swinging at them for 2 or 3 or 5 again. This thing is really good, and I would really suggest you only play this deck with some of these higher power decks. Otherwise, if you play this deck with something down here, they're going to have a terrible time, and they're going to feel like these decks aren't really fun. So please only play this with higher power levels. And yeah, last thing I will say is make sure that you have plenty of dice for this, because if you don't have the dice, then you won't be able to teach counters, and you won't be able to keep track of your tokens because we don't have enough. Anyway, so thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed the second edition of Kitchen Table Magic, and yeah, please enjoy your time at the Magic the Gathering Club.